Airtightness, breathability and vapour control, how does that all work together? So we get asked, and this, I know this is your biggest thing, topic that you love, how does airtightness, ventilation, breathability, vapour control, how does all that kind of work together? People ask that all the time, so the floor is yours.
Yeah, I'll dive into it there. It's nebulous and nuanced, but it all works together, and perhaps once I start rambling you can jump in and save me. But basically we absolutely need to ventilate the spaces that we live in to ensure human health, the respirable air quality, evacuate toxins and moisture and all the things that we produce through day-to-day living practices. And a really effective way to do that is to make sure that the building components, the fabric, is airtight. So the connection between the wall, between the window, between whatever else. So when we're talking about airtightness, we're talking about the uncontrollable infiltration and convective movement of air between the building components.
And into the fabric of the building.
Which is essential for maintaining good internal air quality. It's essential for maintaining the moisture conditions of the building materials, because convective air movements transport a lot of moisture.
And that's the critical thing.
And that's the critical thing from our perspective. And then in conjunction with good levels of air tightness, we then also need to think about how we ventilate the space, whether that's manually or mechanically, and there's kind of pros and cons to both. But fundamentally, air tightness does not mean bad or poor ventilation. It often goes hand in hand with very good ventilation.
Exactly. So you can open your windows if you really want to, but equally when it's blowing a hoolie outside and freezing cold, you don't really want uncontrolled amounts of air blowing through your building, because obviously that's going to drop the temperatures, and it doesn't matter how much insulation you've got. If you've got uncontrolled air leakage, you're not going to stay warm. So that's sort of ventilation and how we ventilate the building. How do you, and the question that we get a lot is, how do you square airtightness and vapour control? How can something be airtight but allow the passage of vapour? So what do you say to that?
Yeah, really critical. So we need both of these things to work hand in hand. Materials can very much be airtight and either vapour retarding or vapour permeable. If a material is vapour retarding, then it's also airtight. So in an application of a solid wall, for example, we know and we understand that we need to accommodate for this inwards drying, particularly if we're internally insulating it. So in that context, we might want to use a membrane or a lime plaster that's very vapor permeable, so it establishes air tightness and we can connect it nicely to the adjacent components, but it maintains this capacity to dry towards the room side.
To transport individual water molecules. Because that's the thing I think people get confused about, is how a surface can prevent the transport of air but still allow individual tiny little atoms of water to work their way through that structure. And I guess that's about pore sizes, it's about the type of material, the way that it interacts with moisture, the connectedness of all those pores. So, water molecules are obviously very, very tiny relative to air, and they're allowing that transition of moisture through the wall. But how do you normally explain that?
Yeah. So you're absolutely right. Basically, moisture vapor molecules are absolutely minuscule. Think about like a rubber dinghy in the North Sea type situation. The North Sea being the pore structure, and the rubber dinghy being the moisture vapor molecule. So when if you imagine you were a vapor molecule bouncing around in your indoor air, when you're looking at a wall, you're mostly looking at open space. So there's it's relatively free for that vapor molecule to transfer into a material, but it's prohibitive to the movement of air.
And bulk amounts of air. Individual molecules of oxygen or nitrogen or whatever will
also diffuse through.
Yeah, exactly. But for bulk air exchange, we're talking, and but again, that varies depending on how breathable, vapor permeable that structure is. So
absolutely, yeah. And in conjunction with that, when there's a connection with a roof, for example, in a roof, we don't have this absorption of water from wind-driven rain, hopefully. And so we don't need this high level of inwards drying to be facilitated. And so in that instance, that is absolutely the sort of application where we would use a membrane that is both airtight and vapor retarding.
Okay. So it is about pore sizes. It's about bulk air movement and bulk or movement of individual water molecules. So yeah, so that's how we get it across. And then vapor control, we need to control vapor because uncontrolled amounts of moisture movement into structures generally is damaging. Into masonry structures, it depends on location, weather, amount of insulation. So that whether you need a vapor control layer in a wall when you're internally insulating, for example, does vary. So that's when we're using woofy. What about in roof structures and lightweight structures?
Yeah. So in lightweight structures, I think there's broadly an advantage to using materials that can buffer moisture, because within the insulation layers, moisture is ubiquitous. There's moisture in the timber, there's moisture in the air during construction, and so having a material that can buffer and manage drying is really useful. But we don't want to invite the flow of moisture into that structure. So having a membrane there that can resist the flow of moisture from room side, the diffusion gradient typically being from inside to out.
That's an important point, because whatever it is, 9-10 months of the year, moisture is moving from the interior. Heat and moisture are moving together always. And so, most of the year, certainly in the UK, it's colder outside than in. The moisture flow is generally from the inside to the outside. So again, that's quite an important point to get across. So yeah. Good.
Although the sort of key thing being most of the time the sort of vapor retarders that we're going to be using are very much vapor retarders, and often at the weekend of that, so very different to having a vapor barrier on the underside of the roof.
That's a good point.
During temperatures like we have at the moment, where that you do get this reverse phenomena of the diffusion grading back towards the room side, they are dynamic enough to be able to accommodate.
And that's a useful comment actually, because a vapor retarder, you're talking about an SD value of about 1500. Our vapor control layers are between about 5 and, I don't know, really tight one might be 100 or something like that.
Yeah.
So they're slowing the flow of moisture into the structure so that the structure can deal with the amount of moisture, but they're also allowing the flow of moisture back inwards. If you put a 1500 meter membrane on the inside of a roof structure where you've got that's trying to inwards dry, you're obviously going to get a lot of condensation on the back of it. So yeah, that's an important point.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well,
Good.
I reckon that